I thank you everyone so much for joining again, one of our very important sessions as we come towards the end of our 2022 Love Through Loss a virtual event around Baby Loss Awareness Week, and every conversation that we can have, speaking to as many areas of baby loss as possible. I'm Lala Langtree-White. I am a birth, bereavement and postpartum doula. And I'm joined by one of my colleagues and fellow panelists, Hazel Leonard, who is a midwife today. And we want to talk a little bit about postpartum through baby loss, because I think sometimes that isn't as well explained to families as possible. And sometimes you haven't perhaps even reached necessarily a stage in your pregnancy where you've been looking into what that looks like. You've just been focusing on where you are now. And I think sometimes the postpartum can really surprise you. So Hazel and I just want to have a little conversation around that. So Hazel, I don't know that we need to do a massive introduction. People have seen us a lot today.
Yes. I mean, if you've watched any of the sessions, you kind of know who we are.
You can find us in the welcome. But I wanted to start by asking you, I guess, to explain a little bit from kind of the medical side. At what point in a pregnancy are you likely to start experiencing those kind of traditional postpartum symptoms? Because there are many different elements to this that we can talk about. But if you can talk about a few of the kind of the classic ones, and at what gestation in pregnancy are you going to experience some of those?
Yeah, no, and I think it's really important to know about those things. And even many women I've supported, so I've been a midwife for 14 years, and many women I've supported with full-term pregnancies with living babies are very shocked at what happens to their bodies. So I think when you've suffered a loss, you could be inclined to feel like, well, my baby's not here, so why would my body react in that way? But our bodies don't know, and when we're looking at to make it very not desensitize it, but when we're looking at the biology, what happens is it's very different for everyone. But some of the changes, and I'll talk about them in a little bit more depth, are things like your milk coming in. So you will have breast milk, for example, in many cases. You might have a wound, you might have stitches, you may have had a C-section, you might have had a vaginal birth and maybe you've had a couple of stitches. You'll have bleeding afterwards, maybe you have some after pains. Your body will look different physically, after carrying a baby, it can look very different. Then you've got things like your menstrual cycle and that returning to some sort of normality. So your body's going through a lot. Generally, when we're looking at things like breast milk, for example, we generally say from about 16 weeks, this can start to happen. It is very different for everybody. Somebody might be watching that was 14 weeks and they had it. Somebody might be watching it that was 20 weeks and had a loss and didn't get anything. But the way it works in a biological sense is the site of the placenta. So the placenta releases a hormone called progesterone. And progesterone we know as the pregnancy hormone. It helps to kind of sustain pregnancies. It's often given in early pregnancy as a supplement if there's a high-risk pregnancy, for example. And when that placenta is removed from the site, you don't have that progesterone anymore. So that hormone starts to kind of drop down. And then you get other hormones that kick in and kind of replace it. So you'd get something called prolactin. So prolactin is pro, which is positive, and lactin, which is lactate, which is milk. So progesterone and prolactin can't be high at the same time, for example. So you need one to be low for the other one to be high. And as the progesterone drops, your prolactin can start to go up, and that can cause this surge of breast milk. Now, some women, well, actually many doctors, and I know you've seen this as well, Lala, many doctors will just say, I'll give you a pill for that and we can stop that. And we absolutely can. You can suppress those hormones, you can stop that from happening. But if you don't, then maybe on day 3 or day 4, after you have given birth, your breasts will feel very full, they'll feel very firm, and you may be leaking milk. Now, some women, I think,
and I would say often at this stage, you've gone home from hospital. So you aren't in that care of the people who've been supporting you medically. So it can take you a bit by surprise as well. And you may not know quite where to turn to. And I think
Absolutely.
one of the emotional elements of that is that women can feel a real range of things around that, whether they feel cheated by their body, that their body hasn't recognized that they've had this loss, and especially during pregnancy loss as well, that that your sort of body hasn't caught up to what's gone on, and then also some people feel a real sense of almost like a tenderness around seeing the milk that their body was making to nurture their baby, that their body was prepared to love and nurture and care for this baby. So it's again, there is no one size fits all, and I think you're right that it tends to be kind of a bit of a blanket fix. I think we like to fix and make better, and it's not necessarily always quite as simple as that, is it? It's about understanding all your choices, a bit like a birth plan, through having a loss. If you have a baby that has died in utero, what birth do you want? What does that look like? How can we make that the most positive, supported experience for you to birth your baby?
And I think one of the running themes that we've seen in every single session is the word choice, and it keeps coming up time and time again. And I think if you've experienced that, it's having the choice of saying, okay, I want to take this medication because I don't want to experience that, or maybe having it there and then seeing how you feel at the time. But knowing that it's a thing and knowing that you have a choice about it is quite important. Some of the things that you physically will feel that you don't necessarily have a choice over would be things like wounds, for example, wounds and scarring. And I know from supporting people previously that some people find a reassurance. If they've got a C-section scar, they're like, that's my baby's scar. That's my reminder of my baby that they existed. Or it might not be a scar in like a C-section way. It might be stretch marks. It might be like spider veins. It might be something on your body that when you look at it is going to remind you of your baby. And that's not always going to be a good thing. There are some days where you might just not want to face that and you might not want to look at that. But in other ways, many people do find it a reminder that you carried your baby inside your body, and that's a mark that they've left on you physically. You've also got to heal as well, and that's not a metaphor. You physically got to heal, and the healing process can be very different for everybody, and you are still at risk of complications. You are still at risk of having increased bleeding, for example. You're still at risk of infection, like with any wound. If it's offensive, if it's producing I always say if the body produces anything green, it's never really good, no matter where it's from. If you have a cold and you've a green snotty nose, it's not good. If you've got green coming from any wound or anything like that, it could be an infection. And I think it's important to be aware of signs, maybe that your body's not recovering in the way it should, and that you do need to seek help, because it's easy to switch yourself off from the world and go, that's it, I'm staying in the house, I'm not leaving now I'm home. Bleeding can be quite heavy initially, especially. It depends as well on the gestation of your pregnancy. So when we're looking at how much your uterus has grown and the placental site, and how much work your uterus has to do to contract back to almost its original size, it doesn't quite go back to its original size, but the bleeding could be, like if you were full term, for example, you'd be looking at a couple of weeks approximately. For some people it can go on for 4 to 6 weeks lightly, but if you were 16 weeks, then you might only have like 3 or 4 days of bleeding. After pains are something that people can have as well, and after pains your uterus is a muscle, so every time you use it, it has to work that little bit harder to contract back down. And for some people, they find that the more babies you have, the more painful that gets, and it can feel, lots of people report it's very similar to like mild labor pains, and that can, that cramping and that sensation can be quite uncomfortable. The thing that I would always say as well is, don't try not to be a hero in that you have to feel all the pain. you know, you're going through enough. If there's pain relief available for your physical pain, you know, I recommend that people take it. You know, unless it's something you're worried is going to make you feel drowsy or make you feel delirious. But, you know, make sure that you're
But again,
managing
having
your
a
pain.
conversation with your care provider around
Yeah.
appropriate pain relief so that you don't have those feelings, and making sure that you find the one that's right for you as well. So that's important to do. For anyone who does make the choice that they perhaps would like to allow their milk to come in and to naturally wind down that, there's a difference between I mean, in a nutshell, as Hazel's spoken to, we have two ways that milk is created, and one is the lactogenesis 1, which is hormonal and usually laid down by around 17 to 20 weeks of pregnancy. So this is where in that that sort of bracket in between the sort of second trimester going into the third trimester, you can find that people are quite surprised at having milk at that stage as well.
It still feels very early for lots of people, doesn't it, to have milk? It's not I'm not saying it's ever early to have a loss, but it feels early to have milk at that point.
And there's actually a very good resource for this on Empty Arms Bereavement Support. They have got a very good resource for lactation support after loss. And if you choose, if that is a choice that you want to look into, then speak to a lactation consultant so that you have proper support, because the last thing anyone wants is discomfort from getting things like mastitis. However, we know that releasing enough to be comfortable is not going to cause more milk to come in the lactogenesis phase 2. Some women want to see it, that there is a nickname that some people call it white tears, and it's sort of symbolic of what their body's feeling, and that release, and it's seeing that your body was prepared to nurture and love your baby. Some people like to keep some of that milk and have it made into jewelry. That is a memento of how their body was prepared for this baby, when I think sometimes we can feel our bodies have let us down. I think grief can be so complex. Again, I don't say that to support that notion, because again, you and I are the first to say you did nothing wrong at all. But this can be, it can be a symbol of how your body was prepared to embrace this baby. I think another thing that people are often quite surprised by are the night sweats. So a lot of people experience that postpartum, can be quite surprised by that. And this is your body's way of releasing the water that is naturally built up within your body during pregnancy. Again, it's going to be potentially more intense the further along in gestation you are. And again, it's something that is just a case of, it's a little bit of riding it out. It's a little bit of kind of being able to have a loving partner who can change the bed sheets frequently for you if needs be, or anyone who's caring for you, so that you can be as comfortable as possible. And again, I think people can be surprised at experiencing that quite early in pregnancy loss as well.
And I think it's all of, as well, that hormonal rebalancing. I wouldn't say it's a hormonal imbalance. It is definitely rebalancing, because you know it happens across the board. It does happen to everyone, and especially when that big shift happens very often on the third day and on the fourth day. I think lots of people feel very emotional, regardless of their birthing experience. And then when you add loss into that as well, knowing that those days, in particular the third and the fourth day, can be extremely overwhelming.
Absolutely. We know in a healthy pregnancy and birth, we know that the first 10 to 14 days, particularly, up to 80% of women report feeling very emotionally unbalanced at that time, feeling erratic, feeling what we typically call the baby blues. So I think it's very important to be really aware of that, and for those who are supporting mum at this stage, to really know that this is a particularly emotionally vulnerable time where you have got the shock and the grief and the acceptance and the processing to take place. at the same time as feeling somewhat at the mercy of your body and the hormones that it's going through as it's trying to process as well physically what's going on.
Because I say fortunately or unfortunately, depending on the point you come from, the breast milk you can take medication for it, but everything else you can't. Everything else is, you have to maintain obviously an element of making sure that you're comfortable pain wise, but there isn't a magic pill for the night sweats. There isn't a magic pill to change what's happening with your hormones and how that's going to feel in the first couple of weeks. So support is essential. And it's also having your own kind of boundaries of what you need at that time. If you want people around you, if you don't want people around you, do you need to speak to a therapist? Do you need to speak to a counselor? I mean, I would recommend that for anybody that's suffered a loss anyway. I think it's best not to wait until you're at what we call crisis before you're seeking support. But equally, you have to be ready to talk, because it's not an easy process. So you need to wait till what's right for you, but that having that time for yourself, having those boundaries of what you feel comfortable with, I think is very important.
Absolutely. And again, these are things that I think, the people who are supporting you in that postpartum period can feel, and especially after the loss of a baby, can feel very unsure as to what to do. But things like, as you drop off meal trains. So for example, sending over a Deliveroo to mum, just saying, listen, tonight I've ordered you dinner. And it's going to be dropped off at 7 p.m. Or perhaps suggesting to the family, listen, pop a cool box outside your front door, so that people can just drop off some easy to eat, easy to reheat things as well. So just those sorts of things are taken off your plate if there are, or put on your plate, if there are siblings involved. Following the family's lead about what they need in terms of help with school runs, or play dates, because again, it's going to be very individual to a family as to whether they want to keep those children very, very close to them, or whether they need a little bit of help and space and support as well. And following the family's lead about how they are talking to their children, what words they are using, and how they're describing grief, so that everyone's on the same page. And the same with the support from school or nursery as well. We've talked a little bit about that in sibling support, and again, it's a conversation that we're all keen to grow as well. So all of those sorts of things. Pets, if you've got any pets, again, making sure that get friends and neighbors to get, walking them for you and taking care of them. It might be just coming and saying, listen, I'm going to drop off a laundry basket outside the house, put anything in it that needs ironing, and I'll take it and do it. Anything that can be just done for you, so you're not having to think about school uniforms or anything else. Just little
rather
things
than saying, like, what do you need? I think is a very common question. Or if you need anything, let me know, and people won't let you know. So just taking it into your own hands. Nobody's ever going to be cross with you for providing them dinner or doing a load of washing, or helping to pick their kids up. And especially with if you're looking at loss from like a C-section point, maybe you weren't anticipating that, you won't be able to drive for 4 or 5, I think it's approximately 6 weeks. I always think, again, it depends on your insurance company. And I say, if you can't do an emergency stop safely, then you shouldn't be driving.
And sometimes it actually invalidates your insurance, so you need to check with individual insurance companies.
I know definitely in the UK it does. Here, because the cars are insured and not always the driver, I don't know if it's such a.
We've had varying different policies from different people. So again, it's very much individual. Check with your individual policy.
But equally, I just think before a certain time, before 6 weeks really is not sensible. And just, I know that we're kind of running out of time, but one thing that I did want to focus on in this session was your menstrual cycle and kind of contraception. And I think
absolutely.
Your body is
going
to and your body is going to, once everything kind of rebalance itself, you will ovulate, and you won't necessarily know when you're going to ovulate until 2 weeks later when you get your period. And very many couples that I've supported, especially if they've had a miscarriage or an early miscarriage, do conceive quite quickly. So I think being aware of if that's something you choose and that you would like to happen, fine. But I also think there needs to be a period of grieving, and depending on what that looks like for you. But knowing that, you know, within 6 weeks you could have a period, which means that you could ovulate within like a 6-week period, and that might not be something that even crosses your mind, because how could my body allow another pregnancy after what we've just gone through? But again, your body doesn't necessarily realize or know. So that's something that you definitely need to think about and discuss. And again, like you just said, intimacy, you know, that can take a long time for somebody to feel ready to be intimate.
And having a conversation, keeping the communication open between you and your partner, which can be very difficult through grief anyway, because you can both experience it at different stages, at different times, in different ways as well. And what your coping mechanisms can be are very different. So sometimes, you know, being very self-compassionate with that and giving yourself time, giving your partner time as well, because both of you, it may not just be mum who doesn't feel ready to resume that part of your relationship, it may be dad as well. So that conversation is really important. And again, just the hormonal element of that is understanding that there may be some additional vaginal dryness afterwards, and just comfort wise, you know, you may need to think about using lubrication at that stage as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also from a healing perspective as well, if you don't feel physically healed, then just don't have sexual intercourse until you're feeling like your body is ready, and taking it slow, you know, not rushing anything, you know, feeling comfortable to say stop if it's just not the right time. Again, kind of having those boundaries and having that discussion first, which can feel strange. I know that some couples don't always talk about intimacy, you know, it's something that happens between them, but it's not something that they necessarily talk about in detail. Maybe just having that conversation of, you know, let's just see how this goes. But
absolutely. And are there areas of your body, absolutely, are there areas of your body that are feeling triggering to you at that moment, whether it is tenderness in the breasts or whether it is around the abdomen, you know, things like that. Just being very, very mindful of those and having those conversations as much as possible, I think is really important to do. And again, hopefully you should always have a bereavement care pathway and have follow-ups with your obstetrician, with your medical team who've been caring for you, and know that it's okay to ask to be seen. Again, like, don't feel like you do not fit into the medical system once you've left that hospital. It's really important that you feel able to ask for the care that you need.
And it's also, I think as well, as something else that I've come across quite a lot is, it's okay to see a different doctor.
Absolutely.
If you find going back to that office, and it's not necessarily that you had bad care with that doctor, maybe you had the best support and the best care, but you might just find going back to that office triggering. You might find going back to that hospital triggering. A very good friend of mine saw a specific doctor, and she loved her, she thought she was great, but she's like, I couldn't face walking back into that room after she had a molar pregnancy, and going into that same scan room, I just couldn't face hearing that diagnosis. So you don't owe anybody anything, you know, you have to do what's best for you, and if you find that it's too much going back to your previous care provider, you can speak to friends, get some recommendations, contact us, and we'd be happy to kind of support and guide you in that way.
Absolutely. And I think that's the other thing, is if we can support you in your postpartum, if you have questions, please know that we are here as well, as a team of you know, perinatal support specialists. We are here to be able to be that support as well. So sometimes just not even going out of the home unless it's obviously medically required, you know that people are here.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we are at time. Again, me and Lala could speak about these things for hours and hours, but I hope that you found this session beneficial, and I hope there's some key points in there.
Absolutely. And if I know that we are joined by Cassie within this session, if she has any questions, if thinks of anything that we haven't raised within her scope as well as a fertility doula and educator, please, Cassie, do chime on in. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Lala.
Thank you. It was a lovely conversation. All right.
Bye.
Bye.